And welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Still Curtain Podcast. I'm your host, Tommy Jaggi, editor of Still Curtain, and joining me, as always, is Still Curtain contributor Shayne Kubas. We are going to continue to talk about Steelers OTAs for a little bit. This afternoon, we are going to break down the 5 biggest strengths on the Steelers roster. Now that the roster revamp has happened, we're getting ready for that 90-man roster heading into the summer. And we will also be scouting Payton Wilson. So we're going to give a detailed scouting report on him, strengths, weaknesses, and like I always like to do, the pro player comparison, high end, low end. What could this guy be in the NFL if he reaches the ceiling or if all goes well? So let's start with this today, Shayne. Justin Fields will not be returning kicks for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Contrary to the rumor, I would say, that was out there by Jaylen Warren. He kind of leaked it. But it's not something that's actually happened. Justin Fields shut this down to the media during OTAs, after OTA practice, met with the media and said, no, that's not happening. I'm essentially saying that I'm a quarterback, and I don't really blame him for that. I was intrigued by the idea, Shayne. I think a lot of people were because of his athletic profile, but he's not going to be used as a kick returner for the Steelers.
Yeah, and the funny thing about it is I think actually prior to the rules changing to where we're going to have more of like a scrum that the returner's running at, and it's more like a running play than a true return that we're used to for all this time. I think it'd have been more interesting to use him in those returns because the prior ones, because you could have another returner out there and then he could maybe throw a pass across the field to, see guys do that stuff sometimes. That would have been interesting to me. I think as a regular returner, as good of an athlete as he is, he's still not a running back. Like, he's not a guy that you want taking a ton of hits. He's not somebody who's used to running from a true play standpoint. He's more of a scrambler. So it didn't make a lot of sense to me, even though it sounded fun. It was kind of more of just like a gimmicky type of thing if they did it. But I'm honestly kind of glad to see that they're focusing on him just hopefully maybe at some point being the starting quarterback, but at least being a quarterback for them.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised if they actually flirted with the idea, and maybe
because he's a great athlete.
Derived it from. And you think about it, with the rule changes, I mean, you're not getting those car crash collisions
as
anymore.
Much, right?
You're adopting that XFL rule where the special teams players line up 5 yards away from each other. So maybe they were saying, all right, maybe with limited injury risk, we can try something, get a little gutsy here. That's not going to be the case. And I don't know. We don't know which side shut it down. Maybe it was a combination of both. I can't see Justin Fields wanting to do that. I mean, he's a quarterback. No. He was a former first-round pick, coming off the best season of his career with the Bears, and then suddenly loses his job because Caleb Williams comes to town. He needs to get shipped out. Obviously got traded before, but we knew Caleb Williams was going to be the pick, and then goes to Steelers, where he's projected to start his Steelers career as a backup to Russell Wilson, who kind of was promised the job by Mike Tomlin, if you will, when he was signed. So we're hoping that he reclaims that. I think that's the ultimate goal, obviously. And so I said the potential risk reward here is just not worth it. Like, even if he houses 1 or 2 of these kick returns, if you were to suffer like a season-ending ACL injury or something that way, it could just completely derail your career as a quarterback, and opportunities are limited as it is. Teams are quick to turn the page and move on. I think that's what already happened to Fields. And so he's going to try to capitalize on every single opportunity. He already said in Steelers OTAs, he wants to be the starting quarterback. He wants to compete for that starting job. So we'll see if the team truly allows that to play out in that regard, or if it's going to be Russell Wilson's job to lose. And other news, Shayne, Joey Porter Jr. calls himself the best cornerback in the NFL. Now, to me, this is nothing like a Chase Claypool scenario. It's not like, oh, I'm a top 3 wide receiver in the league. With Porter, we see that talent, and it flashed early and often last year. I kind of love this mentality. Like, if I'm going to have this mentality for any position, it's cornerback. Like, you need to shake off the bad plays. You need to go out there and you need to think that you're the best on every single play. And I think that that's what Porter has done early in his career. Are you a fan of the mentality that he's bringing so far?
I think not only am I a fan of it, but like you said, you have to have this mentality at that position. Like, there's not a position in the NFL that is more ridiculous to think about. Like, go out there and against a guy who knows what he's doing, and you have to try to figure out what he's going to do to you. Oftentimes, in his case, especially on an island, go try to keep that guy from catching a pass from a quarterback that most guys now are completing 65+% of their passes. Like, go stop him from making a play. it's just absurd. Like, to ask these guys to do this, and for so many of them to actually be able to at least sort of do it, is kind of insane, right? Like, you have to be just so obnoxiously like confident about yourself, because if you're not, when you do get beat, it might be over for you. Like, we've seen guys who are very talented who just can't really get over that hump of like, I'm gonna lose reps. Like, it's gonna happen in the NFL, especially at this position. So for him to feel that way, and he also cited about like no one did what he did of like, traveling with number one receiver, and like that just, he's right. It doesn't happen a lot anymore. A lot of the defenses aren't set up to do that, right? Like, a lot of guys are, you might take away half the field, but you're not taking away a player, right? Because it's just really hard to do that. He was asked to do that a lot last year. So he has, I understand why he said it. Obviously, I think it's good that he feels that way. Because again, if you don't, you're kind of behind the 8 ball already.
Yeah, and cornerback is kind of that awkward position. It's like, you really don't want to see these guys on the field very often, because if they're constantly involved in plays, it means they're probably not doing their job to the best of their ability. Porter was obviously, I think he did an awesome job locking guys down last year. He did have the 12 penalties. I think 4 of them were declined, if I recall off the top of my head. A lot of penalties. He needs to cut down on the grabbiness, but I think the potential is there. And I've kind of said this halfway through his rookie season. I think the potential is there for him to be one of the best man-to-man shutdown cover corners, press man corners in the NFL, because of his size profile, his physicality, and then obviously his demeanor, which he thinks he's the best cornerback in the game today. I think there are some similarities between him and maybe even a Sauce Gardner type. He still has work to do, obviously, to get to that status, but I don't think that it's unattainable that he could be one of the best cover corners.
No, they just don't make him like this guy, right? Like, that's kind of what we talked about when he came out in the draft, is like, guys just don't look like this often, right? He looks insane. I know I always used to say that I think he could tap you on the shoulder from the other room. Like, that's kind of how I feel about like his size profile, right?
Yeah.
So it really helps him. And I think that, again, his style of play is perfect for who he is as a player and how he's built. So I do think, like you said, that the potential to be one of those top 5 guys is certainly there. I don't know if we'll see it in year 2. It kind of depends. I think the room around him kind of hurts him a little bit, because he is going to have to always basically be on the top guy, because we can't really trust anyone else to do that. But it does give him more opportunities to show how good he is. So it's kind of one of those double-edged sword type of things.
And there might be a dozen or so of those guys that have that profile in the league, but none are the same quality player as Porter. And that's the difference, because Steelers have half of those guys on their team.
They do.
Corey Trice Jr., Darius Rush, and Ryan Watts. Obviously, none of them were the prospect of Joey Porter coming out. We'll see if any of those guys can develop to be something alongside him there. But Porter does have the traits, I think, to excel at that position, to be one of the best man cover corners in the league. And so I'm excited about him in year 2. I really am. Like, he's one of the players I'm most excited to see take that second year leap, because I think he's got that mentality. He's got the physicality. He's got the athletic traits. He's got the length, everything to do it at that position and be one of the premier players at his position. All right, Shayne, the other story in the news today, everybody is raving about Arthur Smith and what he's going to bring for the Pittsburgh Steelers. If you look at just player quotes from everybody at Steelers OTA so far, they can't find enough good things to say about their new offensive coordinator. Is this like recency bias? Is it just because they've played with Matt Canada, who was like the lowest of the lows, or do they really have something going on good here with Smith?
So I've actually talked about this with some people because of all these quotes coming out. And I think it's very funny, because I think it's about a 50-50 split of guys just having a actual professional offensive coordinator in the room. And then also he does do some fun stuff, like especially in the running game. Like the thing with Arthur Smith ultimately is you could look at him in 2 different ways. You could look at him as the Falcons head coach, where he did not have much success. His offenses in general were not very good. And then you can look at him in his 2-year stint as the Titans offensive coordinator, where yes, he had Derrick Henry and the offensive line played well. And, he had, AJ Brown and Corey Davis to receive, but he really did a great job of working with those guys. And I think we're hoping to get more of the Titans guy, which makes sense, because that's when he was obviously just calling plays. Like, him just as a play caller, when we've seen him just be a play caller, has been very good in the NFL. So I think guys are excited about that. I think they see the potential in the running game. I think the offensive line being upgraded obviously helps too. Like there's a lot of optimism around the offense. And I think most of it is warranted. It is a little bit funny though, how much they are ranting about a guy who a lot of people don't care for. But again, I do think you got to remember where we're coming from, right? Like it always can be worse. And we've seen that when we moved from Fickner to Canada. Like this though, I think is clearly a true upgrade, obviously, and should help the team a lot.
Yeah, it's something to rave about, like your new quarterback or your new draft picks in OTAs. Yeah. But for people to do it about an offensive coordinator, I think it shows you the drastic difference in approach maybe between Matt Canada and Arthur Smith. And the consensus seems to be that Arthur Smith is much more hands-on, much more involved than what Canada was at this stage in the summer. And so it's one of those things where we have to wait and see, because we can't tell anything from OTAs, nothing really game plan wise at all. And there's no film evidence, nothing like that out there to support anything. Otherwise, we're just taking the players at their word, thinking that, this is going to be an improvement. I think that that's something that most fans realize is it's hard to go down from where we were these past 3 seasons. Yeah. Although you look at Arthur Smith, his time in Atlanta, points per game, not all that different than where Matt Canada was. Yeah. Different scenarios, was dealing with obviously some dreadful quarterback play. But we obviously hope that improves greatly this year. It looks more like the Titans, Arthur Smith, like you said. Right. Let's talk about let's move on, Shayne, to our scouting report for Payton Wilson. I went and posted my scouting report this morning. You can find it on stillcurtain.com, but I want to review it with you here. So what I do with all these guys, Shayne, and I've watched lots and lots of draft film prior to the draft. I watched hours of Payton Wilson's film ahead of the draft before I knew that the Steelers were going to draft him. And then once they did a deeper dive into the film again, just to re-examine and reevaluate who this player is, what he could potentially bring to the table for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And so I want to go over his strengths, his weaknesses, and then some potential NFL player comparisons. Like, who could this guy be if he reaches a ceiling, if his career is cut short? Like, what's going to happen to Payton Wilson? We'll give a high end, low end, and most likely comparison. So let's start with this. Shayne, I've got for strengths, Payton Wilson, and Steelers obviously took Payton Wilson in the 3rd round, a player who many believed, and I think Daniel Jeremiah said this is a 1st round talent who ended up slipping because of the injury stuff. It came out during the draft that he was playing with an ACL in one of his knees. And so that was news to Payton Wilson himself.
I will say, he refuted that actually. I think later.
He refuted that, but how do you refute medicals?
I don't know. I mean, maybe I don't know. That was funny that he did that, though. I wanted to throw that out there. But regardless whether he has one or not, we know that there's injury risk there. So.
Oh, yeah. There's absolutely injury risk. And so we'll get to that as well. And I just to rehash some of that, a couple of major knee injuries, missed a college season, was cut very short because of that, had one back in high school, had a shoulder injury, and then the report of not playing with an ACL, which we've seen players do and have lengthy careers. If that proves to be the case or not, I don't know if we'll ever have surefire evidence of that if he's refuting that. Let's start with his strengths, though, here, Shayne. For Payton Wilson, I have impressive range and playmaking ability in space, thanks to his frame and athletic traits. Not the longest guy, but the height helps him in that regard, just to clog up lanes. Outstanding athlete with jaw-dropping speed, ran 4.43 at the NFL Combine. He plays every bit as fast as what his time speed would suggest. This is not Devin Bush in this regard. And I think Devin Bush at Michigan played a lot faster. Devin Bush for the Steelers, year 2, year 3, year 4, that guy wasn't playing like a 4.4 speed type of linebacker. I think Payton Wilson plays as fast as his time speed indicates. Rare height for today's NFL linebacker, nearly 6'4", 6'3" and 7/8 is what he came in at the NFL Combine. Has a nose for the football, routinely involved where the play happens. Has a good football IQ, finds himself in the right place at the right time routinely. Rock solid tackler, rarely allows the ball carrier to slip out of his grasp. An excellent feel for zone coverages. Quarterbacks have to be mindful of where this guy is because he can make you pay. He can take that football away. Impressive hands to take the football away, can disrupt passing lanes, can slip blocks, and make plays in the backfield. Shayne, is there anything else that you would add for strengths for that list?
No, that's pretty exhaustive. I know you watched a lot of Wilson, so I'm not going to step on you too much on that one. But I do think the thing that we have to think about the most with him, and this is the thing that the Steelers have struggled with the most since really Ryan Shazier, right? And that's having somebody who can legit turn and run with guys in coverage, who can legit run and take guys away in the outside running game. Just having that speed at that position that is so important in the modern NFL because teams want to attack you in that part of the field. It is much easier in general to flood targets in that part of the field because linebackers in general aren't going to be as good covering as corner safeties, right? Like it just makes sense to be able to do that. So you have to have somebody who can at least threaten to take the ball away, can threaten to jump passing lanes, who can run with receivers, even in his case, probably can in a lot of cases. Like having that on the field, even if it's not always consistently there, it's something that teams have to think about. Offenses have to think about it for a half second more than maybe if you're playing a team that doesn't have that range in the middle of the defense. So that's the biggest thing I think for Steelers fans that you should be happy about is having a guy, plus you bring in obviously Queen, having guys who can legit run.
Yeah, and that's been like the Achilles heel of the Steelers defense for a decade now. Shazier was really the only one who could play that role and be that can rob quarterbacks that way. Since then, they've had nobody that could fill it. They tried with Devin Bush. That was a failed attempt.
There's glimpses and
just the pass defense over the middle of the field has just been such a big weakness. And so I'm hoping that Payton Wilson can bring something in that regard in his game. All right, Shayne, let's go over the weaknesses. Scary injury history dating back to his high school days. Played without an ACL was the report by Ian Rappaport. According to doctors, and again, I don't know how Payton Wilson refutes what the doctors are saying.
I don't know.
Again, whether he has an ACL in that knee or not, it didn't stop him from running a 4.43 official at the NFL Combine. It didn't stop him from having an amazing 2023 season. So the guy can definitely move. Tall frame, but lean for his height, only 233 pounds at the Combine. That shows up at times. We'll talk about that. And short arms. And so you don't see this type of build. Very kind of an awkward type of build. A lot of people will say he's this big, long linebacker. He's not necessarily long. 30.5-inch arms. I think is 12th percentile, if I recall off the top of my head.
Yeah.
So that part is not ideal. It's not like a Tremaine Edmonds. You're not pushing like 33, 34-inch arms here. That can be an issue sometimes. We haven't seen it affect his tackling game. He's a really strong tackler still. But it could show up at the NFL level. And I'll tell you where it does show up is struggles to stack and shed blocks consistently. I think that's where you need the arm length the most. He is not a stack and shed block type guy. He's more like how Ryan Shazier was, where you're going to slip blocks because of your speed, your dip, your quickness, rather than just taking a block head on and tossing a guy to the side. Like that's not really his game at all. He must work on leverage at the point of attack. He gets too high because of that frame and can be driven out of the play. I think that shows up fairly often on the field. He lacks a pass rush plan with poor hand usage. This guy made a ton of plays in the backfield, 17.5 tackles for loss in 2023 alone with 6 sacks. But he needs a better pass rush plan when he does blitz. He doesn't, and he needs to use his hands better as a blitzer. But the athletic traits and the instincts alone help him make a lot of plays back there. Kind of Drew Sanders like when you go back and watch his film from the season before. And then he's old entering the NFL, which is 24. To be expected for guys who suffer multiple injuries. But he's 24 years old already. He's going to be 24 years old during his entire rookie season. So there's not a lot of cases of players in general, regardless of position, that are starting their career this old that turn out successful. And again, you can say, sure, if there was two fewer injuries, he was 22 years old coming into the draft, the Steelers aren't touching him because he's maybe a first-round pick at that point.
Yeah,
he doesn't have those.
Maybe.
So, but the age combined with the injury history, I think, is part of the reason that caused him to fall to pick 98 in the draft.
Yeah, and as far as the weaknesses go, you kind of hit it on the head. I think the thing I'm most concerned with him in terms of his ability to be like a 3-down linebacker for us, right? If we wanted him to be one of those guys, can he defend the run at the NFL level well enough? Can he take on blocks at least well enough to not completely get driven out of the play? Because as good as he is with his movement skills, you're not always going to be able to slip blocks that way at the NFL level. These guards and tackles and guys get up to the second level. Yeah, they're big and strong, but they're also way quicker than the guys you face in college. They just are. Like, that's why they're in the NFL. So it's not going to be as easy for him to win with just pure athleticism in the run game. Obviously, if he can't do that, does that make him just a coverage linebacker? Does it make him just a blitzer? Like, what is his role if he can't play the run well enough? That's really the biggest question mark, I think, for me as far as his long-term future as a starter. But even then, I mean, if he's just a great cover player, if he's just a great, athlete in space that can run and chase, like that's plenty good enough for where they drafted him. So it's really not too much
Yeah.
of a concern, but you want to see what his potential can be because he might only be a one contract, maybe a short or second contract player between his injury and age. So you want to get as much out of him as you can, starting even as a rookie, especially with obviously Holcomb still dealing with stuff. He's probably going to play a lot as a rookie.
Yeah, and that is the biggest factor, right? The age and injury history. Can you even trust, like, even if he plays really well on a rookie deal, can you trust to have him on another contract when he's going to be 29, 30 years old, entering his second contract in the NFL? I think that largely depends on how healthy he can stay from now through then. So, and that's a long way off, but that's the downfall of having a 24-year-old rookie instead of a 21 or 22-year-old rookie. You're losing a couple years there, and it's not a great position to lose it at because, like running backs, the linebackers are kind of in today's NFL, kind of the running backs of the defense, where they've got a short shelf life. A lot of times they're tossed into the pile, and teams just draft a new linebacker in the mid rounds and draft and replace and repeat, and that seems to be a trend that's happening more frequently in today's NFL. I think what's so intriguing about this, though, Shayne, is that there's really only a couple of like really good, impactful linebackers in today's football. Like you've got Fred Warner, you've got Roquan Smith, you've got Matt Milano when he's healthy for the Bills, and I think that there's a significant tier gap probably after those guys, and you can even argue that Patrick Queen might be in the next tier down because the talent gap from those top three guys, I think, and then everybody else is fairly significant right now. So if Wilson could end up being in that upper tier, in that top 2 or 3 tiers in the NFL, then I think that could give them a boost. It can give them an advantage that a lot of these other teams don't have.
That's a good point because again, how many true like tier 1 linebackers are there? You kind of name those 3. I mean, you could argue some other guys, like some of the older guys, like Levante David is still an amazing player for his age. But it's just still, he's, 34, I think 35. Like he's getting older. A lot of guys just aren't, a lot of the top guys are guys that are aging now, right? Or have already aged. And you see some guys who are in that tier, like a Shaquille Leonard, who all of a sudden can't play football at like 29 years old or however it is. And granted, he's dealt with injuries and everything else, but like, again, that's what happens with this position. It's really hard to play at a high level for a long time because once your athleticism starts to wane at that spot, teams will pick on you. Like as great as Bobby Wagner, for example, is. Commander's good signing because he's going to be a great run defender, all that stuff. He can't cover anybody anymore. Like it's just what it is, right? He's older and his legs don't work as well. Like once you get to that point, you lose kind of the ability to be a tier 1 linebacker. So I think for Wilson, again, you have to get as much out of him in this first contract because it may not last much longer past that.
Yeah, and we've exited a good era of linebackers, and we're now finding that the NFL has not been replacing these guys because a lot of the guys that are being drafted are busting. And so, I mean, you look at the Devin Bush, Devin White draft, and just the list goes on, and Jamin Davis and a bunch of guys that haven't turned out as expected. That's why I think everything about this, I couldn't have planned it any better because I don't like spending first-round picks on linebacker, just like I don't at the running back position. I don't even like spending a second-round pick on it unless you're getting like a bona fide prospect. But when you're talking a compensatory third-round pick for maybe the nation's best linebacker who was awesome in 2023 at NC State, I am so intrigued by this that this is potentially my favorite overall pick in the draft, Shayne, because of value where they got him. I know that off-ball linebacker is not the most important position, but I'm super intrigued to see if he can stay healthy. Can he be in that category? Can you do a lot of those things? Can you make the splash plays and take the ball away and cover and blitz and do a bunch of different things for this football team? And I'm intrigued by the skill set that he offers here. A couple of stats from last year: 138 tackles, 69 of those solo, 17.5 tackles for loss, 6 sacks, 3 interceptions, 6 passes defended, 2 fumble recoveries, a forced fumble, a defensive touchdown. Earned a 89.8 overall grade, a 90.4 coverage grade from PFF. I believe it was the second best in the nation, if I recall. That is some impressive statistics in 12 games. And so now it's multi-factor verification here, Shayne. It's not just the athlete. It's the athlete with the size, with the production, right? He has just A+ in all 3 of those categories there. And so I think when you look at the collection of those things, you can see why he could have been potentially a first-round linebacker had it not been for the injuries.
Yeah, again, that's what it comes down to, is you're getting a player that normally wouldn't be where you're picking, right? That's just what it comes down to. Even with the age thing, like if it was just age, like he just stayed in college a long time with obviously all the pandemic rules and all that stuff, kept guys in college longer, all that stuff. If he was just 24 but no injury history, this player probably goes around earlier. If he's 22, like you said, he's probably a first-round pick. Like getting a player like this, even if it's for maybe 5 or 6 years instead of 8, 9, 10, is well worth a pick in the third round, especially like you said, a late third-round pick.
Yeah, I think the stat that blows my mind the most, I think all of them are so impressive, but 17.5 tackles for a loss.
Mm-hmm.
That's like an elite number for a pass rusher, or someone whose sole job is to get after the quarterback. Now, a lot of these, he's just darting in there and making plays.
Yeah, college players just couldn't stay with him. And that's the thing with him.
Yeah.
Is, like, you can tell, even though he played in a Power 5 conference, he played against players that just weren't as good as him, especially this past year. Now, obviously, he's older. That factors in, all that stuff. But he produced like somebody who you want somebody like this to produce the way he did, because if they don't, that starts questions like, okay, why didn't you produce? What's going on with this? That's why you love to see the production, because even though traits matter much more at the NFL level ultimately than what you produced in college, if you have the traits and you produced in college, now you don't really have questions about that, right? Now, if you don't succeed, it's probably just something you did, or the team didn't use you right, or whatever else. I don't think there's any chance he doesn't do well unless it's a misuse of him or injuries or something like that.
Yeah, he's certainly a box checker. I think that would be a good way to describe him. He's
like
a box checker with red flags because of injury concerns.
Yes. Yeah.
But he does check the boxes that you need to have checked in order for him to be a top 3-round pick like that. And I think that he was well worth the selection where the Steelers were picking. I could have got behind him with the first of their 3rd-round picks. They took him at pick 98. And so definitely pleased with that. Shayne, let's talk about his projected role on the Steelers, maybe to start his rookie season, and then what you think could happen moving forward beyond that. It's so funny to me that when you look at this roster heading into the 2023 offseason, I mean, this team had a washed up Miles Jack. They had Devin Bush, who just looked like an absolute bust. And at that point, making tackles like 11 yards down the field and showing no tenacity in this game.
Right.
And then Robert Spillane, who somehow goes and has a great season with the Raiders, but not a very good player on the Steelers. You revamp that core. Now, all of a sudden, you have Patrick Queen, Payton Wilson, Cole Holcomb, if he can come back healthy, and Landon Roberts. Like, you are 4 deep at this position. And so it begs the question, like, where does Payton Wilson fit in with this group? Is he destined to start his career as just a sub package linebacker? And can he become a full-time player considering who's there right now?
I do think his role to start the year is going to be as technically the 3rd linebacker, but really it's going to be a timeshare between him and Roberts, because I think they do very different things, right? If you need somebody who can run and chase, if you need somebody who can cover, that's obviously going to be Wilson. If you need somebody who's technically sound, who's a big hitter, who's someone who can stack and shed, that's Roberts, right? Like that's what's probably going to happen, because you pay Queen to come in. He has to be the 3-down guy to start the year, especially with Holcomb out. Yep. He has to play. So if he's going to be the guy that's always on the field at linebacker, I do think you're going to see a pretty, I'd say, close to even split probably to start the year between Wilson and Roberts, just because I think that, especially based on last year, like teams are starting to run the ball a little bit more. So Roberts is probably going to be more valuable at times, more so than Wilson will be on certain situations. So I think you'll see a pretty even split between those two. And to his credit, Roberts did show more in coverage last year than I would have expected him to. I'm not expecting that to continue as he gets only older, but he kind of had to. So there's that aspect of it. But I do think you'll see those two kind of be the primary second linebacker next to Queen. It's just going to be situational probably to start the year.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's going to be that some sort of rotation there, with Queen obviously carving out the most snaps, assuming all these guys are healthy. Yeah. I would say if you had to list a snap count order, Shayne, between those top 4 guys, how would you have that going?
Well,
let's assume that Holcomb. Yeah. Let's assume that Holcomb is healthy at the beginning of the year, doesn't need to go on PUP.
If he's at the beginning of the year, okay. So if we're doing that, Queen, I still think. I mean, you just paid him. he doesn't have as much injury risk as Holcomb, obviously. So you probably don't want to play Holcomb too much to start the year, even if he's healthy. Queen, I do think Holcomb is the second best linebacker, obviously, on the team if he's healthy. So I would assume Holcomb will be the primary second linebacker then. And then you see Wilson and Roberts kind of, I'd say, split relatively evenly the third linebacker reps. Like if you do go into a base situation, one of those two will be in there. If you want to take Holcomb off, either just out of precaution or if you want to get somebody even more athletic than him out there with Wilson, you throw him out there. So I would assume that it's probably Queen, Holcomb. I'll say Roberts in that case to have kind of the veteran be the first guy off the bench, and then probably Wilson slides down a little bit from there.
Okay. Yeah. It's weird because I can see, obviously, I think that Queen, based on the money you paid him, his Pro Bowl status last year, all that, he's going to get the most snaps on the team if he stays healthy. The next three guys, I can see it going kind of in any which order when you're talking about like a snap count per game type of thing. I think that could just, I think that they're all going to finish the season very close in that regard, where they're just going to use kind of a heavy rotation, get guys in certain packages where it fits best. And then going beyond that, the hope obviously is that Payton Wilson can develop into that starting type linebacker for the Steelers. If he becomes that, I don't think there's going to be any question that the Steelers made a good decision with this pick. If he ends up being just a sub package linebacker, you can still find third round value out of that guy. It's just, the preference obviously would be maybe he's that guy that you pair with Queen for the next 4 years, but that's the wishful thinking. And so I want to get to my player comparisons before we move on to our next discussion topic for today. And so if you want to get your questions in, I can get to those just a minute if you are joining us here.
This. Yeah, we'll get to them once you're
okay. I'll get your questions in now if you want them. Let's talk about NFL player comparisons for linebacker Payton Wilson, Pittsburgh's third round pick, former NC State linebacker. Big, fast, athletic, productive, checks a lot of boxes, but also has injury concerns. And so here are my high end, low end, most likely player comps for Payton Wilson. I want to hear what you have to say about each of these, Shayne. So let's do one at a time. I'll give you a chance to kind of give your rebuttal and see if you have any thoughts on this. My high end player comp for Payton Wilson is, and some of these I'm going back a little bit in time here. Gotcha. It's fresh for me. Is probably before your time, Shayne.
We'll see. Yeah, we'll see.
So my high end comp, if everything goes well, he can stay healthy and have a decade-ish long career. I think he can be a very similar type of player as Keith Bullock was for the Tennessee Titans for about a decade.
That's
6'3", 235-ish pounds, run and chase, but also a field general type guy, could just tackles galore, can take the ball away, interceptions. So I think that play style wise, size profile wise similarities. Now Bullock, obviously one of his best traits was his ability to stay healthy. And so this guy's playing 15, 16 games every single year until the end of his career. I don't know if Wilson is capable of doing that. Like that seems like it seems like a stretch, honestly, to have a decade-long career, but that's why it's a high-end comp. So what do you make of that one?
That's a fun one. I haven't thought of that a player in a long time, but I am very familiar with Keith Bullock, so you're not losing me yet. I do think it's fun because he is in his era, he was probably considered kind of, if I remember, kind of an undersized linebacker because he was sub 240, right? Like he wasn't one of those guys that was kind of this thumper types. He was a great athlete out in space. Like he was able to do a lot of that stuff. So I do think that from just a play style standpoint, you hope Wilson can be a player like that. Like you said, the biggest thing is, can he play a long time and not be injured? That's kind of the biggest question with Wilson, right? So that would, as a high-end comp, that does mean everything works out. He's healthy. The ACL doesn't matter whether it's there or not. Who cares? And you're good, right? Like that's the idea. So that makes a lot of sense.
And if you're unfamiliar with Keith Bullock, or if you can't recall back, he did make a Pro Bowl and All-Pro once in his career, and it came in back in 2003, which was his fourth season in the league. Still had some really strong years after that, but that was his lone All-Pro season. But again, 10 years with the Titans, 1 year with the Giants to close out his career, made it until age 33. I'm not convinced that Payton Wilson can play that long. If I had to set the over under, it's not 33 years old because I'm hammering the under on that.
Probably.
So, but I think that if the knee proves not to be a problem, if it's Hines Ward-like, and you can still have a really long career with the injury there, I think that it's going to be a mute point there. So second one, Shayne, let's do the low end comparison now. And this guy was highly praised coming out of college, but in terms of career path and similar profiles, Boss Bailey. So going back to 2003 here. Now, Boston turned out like his brother Champ, who was obviously just a shoo-in for the Hall of Fame.
Oh, yeah.
Boss Bailey was a second round pick in 2003 by the Detroit Lions. Kind of that tall, a little bit thinner linebacker with great range, could do a lot of things. His best season actually came as a rookie, and then his production kind of tailored off a little bit from there. The problem with Boss Bailey didn't really have to do with his play. It had to do with his inability to stay healthy.
Yes.
Year 2, missed his entire second season with a season-ending injury. In his third season, came back, but only got to play 11 games in that year. Played 12 games, started 12 games in 2006, 12 games in 2007. 2008, played 6 games, and that was it. That was the end of his career. And the reason I chose Boss Bailey, apart from being 6'3" and 238 pounds, I think it was 233 pounds, very similar size profile, ran a 4.58 at the combine. So another athletic guy, but I can see Payton Wilson having a very similar career path when it comes to playing pretty well, missing some time, coming back and playing pretty well and missing some time. And then eventually your career ends at 29 years old, like it did for Boss Bailey.
Yeah. I mean, that's, I do think it makes sense because like you said, it wasn't so much a question of whether he could play. It was, will he play, right? Like, is he going to be able to play? That's the biggest concern I have with Payton, because I'm not worried about him being able to play on the field. Like, obviously he's a rookie. We need to see him play in the NFL, all that stuff. I get that. But what I've seen of him, I'm not really concerned about his actual football ability. It's, can he get on the field and stay on the field for, 10, 11, 12 weeks at a time, and hopefully more than that. That's something he just hasn't shown a lot of at the high school or college level outside of last year, which, recency, great. Maybe that means he turned a corner with whatever was going on, but the NFL, doesn't get easier to not get hurt. Let me just put it that way. It does not get easier to not get banged up once you're going against guys who are just as good as you as athletes and everything else. So.
Yeah, and there's a saying in this business that injured guys stay injured, and we see that generally a lot of times. And so we can be as optimistic as we want, but we can't ignore his scary injury history and think that it won't play a factor at any point in his career. If it doesn't, then he's going to greatly defy the odds of players that have had lengthy injury histories from high school through college that don't in the NFL. And so I don't want to be pessimistic about that, but I think there's a very solid chance that he could have a career path like Boss Bailey did. Another similarity is Boss Bailey turned 24 during his rookie season too. So he was an older prospect. It just could not stay healthy. Played pretty well when he was on the field, couldn't stay healthy. Career was cut very short. Ended up playing just 64 NFL games with 57 starts. So I can see that as a low end. And again, to me, it's not a question. I really don't think it is a question of whether or not Payton Wilson is going to be a good football player. Because I think that good, it will be probably the least word that we could use to describe him. I think he's going to be good if he can stay healthy. He's just, when you're instinctive and athletic and physical and all the traits that he possesses, I think that he's bound to be good. But his career, the low end of his career could be derailed because of the injury stuff. And that's what's so scary.
For sure. So,
and then Shayne, for my most likely player comp, again, I went back to the early to mid 2000s here, and I have Thomas Howard, former Raiders Thomas Howard, ended up playing with 3 different teams, went to the Bengals and then went to the Atlanta after that.
Right.
But Thomas Howard coming out was 6'3", 238 pounds, ran a 4.47, something like that. So again, very similar size and athletic profile. Let's see, I've got it right here. Ran a 4.42. So, and Payton, he was blazing. I mean, that was fast for the time as well.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure.
6'3", 239, ran a 4.42. Was an older prospect. He was 23 as a rookie. Payton Wilson's 24, obviously. Started his career off really strong, stayed healthy his first 4 seasons, and then injuries kind of hit after that. Lost his starting job for a little bit, came back and started in 2011. And then his final 2 years, Shayne, played 1 game in 2012, season ended, played 2 games in 2013, season ended, career's over. And it was done. Essentially, it was done by the age of 28. He ended up playing those final 3 games at age 29 and 30. I think, unfortunately, this is very realistic. Thomas Howard, I think, was a really solid linebacker, when he played for a while there. A very productive guy early in his career, averaged over 100 tackles in his first 3 seasons before kind of the injury bugs started setting in. I think a solid football player that is probably destined to have a career that ends at age 29 or 30 if we're just playing the odds here.
Yeah, and I like that you picked a player like that where like his first 4 seasons were very good, and he didn't really have much issues. It was once he got a little bit older and started to pile up for him injury wise. Like that's kind of unfortunately I don't hope that happens with Payton Wilson, but that's kind of maybe the best outcome you can reasonably ask for. Obviously, you'd love to have a guy who plays 10 plus years, even as an older prospect. But if you get a full first contract out of this guy where he is an impact player for you, everything past that is kind of whatever. Like you'd love to have more, but if you don't get more, you're not mad that you spent a 3rd round pick on that. That's really all this comes down to. I think the Steelers just want to get return on investment on a 3rd round pick. They want a guy who can impact and help their defense, in a window where they're trying to win. And if he can do that, then everyone will be happy with him.
Yeah, and for those listening in who don't really know how this works, I'm typically pretty conservative with my player comparisons.
Yeah.
Like I'm not reaching for the stars with every guy. I think that Payton Wilson is really good, and I don't think it's a matter of talent. I think it's a matter of staying healthy, and that's why
all the other stuff,
I compared him to some players. These last 2 players that I mentioned who had injury concerns, who didn't have the career they could have had otherwise. Shayne, in terms of just the career paths of these players, I think that Payton Wilson is going to be the polar opposite of Patrick Queen, who started his career really slow as a 20-year-old.
Did not do so well.
and I think Patrick Queen is going to be much better on his second contract than he was on his rookie contract, whereas Payton Wilson, I think, is going to be better probably on his rookie contract than he is any contract he'll receive afterwards, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think that's probably a fair way to view it at this time, at least. That's just what makes sense based on where he's at and what his situation is, unfortunately.
And again, hoping he defies the odds here, and we will have to wait and see how that plays out. We're going to move on to our next discussion topic. But before I do, Shayne, do you want to chime in with any chat?
Yeah, we have some chats from throughout the show. So the first one, this was earlier in the show. Darnell Washington more involved this year? ? Probably. This is an offense that
I would say you have to be more involved probably than 7 receptions and 10 targets, I think it was, if I just recall off the top of my head.
Something like that, yeah.
I think for sure, like, I don't know, I'd set his over under maybe like 18.5 receptions. What would you hit? What would you hit at that? Shayne?
I mean, probably with Arthur Smith, I'd say probably I might set it just at 20 straight up. Just because I feel like he's going to try to do some stuff with him in the red zone, especially, which I would love, by the way. That's kind of where I think he shines as a receiver, is just being gigantic and has good hands. So, like, I'd like to see him. Granted, I think part of the reason why we didn't see him in the red zone much is because when were we in the red zone? But that's a whole other problem for us to solve that we'll get to, hopefully. But I do think we'll see him much more this year,
And I'm excited about Washington. I talked about him on yesterday's show with Josh. And so I think that that's a fair question, but good. Thanks for chiming in there, Matt.
We also have a couple from our good friend R Barley 18. I think Smith gets a bad rap for being, this is Arthur Smith, from being a run first physical guy, not a pass happy softy, which is funny. I think that's part of it. I think it's more so just the Falcons' tenure just really kind of left a bad taste in people's mouth. And I understand because there's so much of like, well, you draft the running back at 8. Why isn't he getting 30 touches a game? It's like, well, you probably shouldn't do that. So, like, in his defense, probably not smart to do that. But also, like, Algier was really good. So there's reasons why he was doing some stuff that wasn't very smart in the end. But, like, I think that's what's getting people, is just they can't really separate him as a play caller from his head coaching tenure. So.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, he is the guy that he is, right? He's going to be that wide zone run first type of guy. It helps, and it goes a little bit smoother when you have a competent quarterback and when you have a few other things working for you. Now, he had skill players. I think his offensive line was pretty solid for that scheme, but they just couldn't find a way to score points. And I think, again, a lot of that does come down to the quarterback position, as we've seen, and Steelers fans should know that firsthand, that it's really hard to score if you don't have competent quarterback play. So I do think that's a factor, and willing to give him the benefit of the doubt because of what we've seen in Tennessee in 2019 and 2020. And so let's hope he reverts back to that type of player. Coach,
absolutely. A couple more here with just Wilson here. Agree with coverage, but I believe a big part of middle linebacker issue has been the lack of real nose tackle. That is fair. I do think that is something that especially a lot of modern defenses really do well with, if they have somebody who's a true like two gap or like guy that could really mess stuff up in the middle.
Mhm.
We don't really have that guy still. Like Benton can kind of do it, but I don't like him in that role. I'd much rather him be a penetrator, someone who's attacking upfield. So I do think they need to address that for sure. And then with that, with linebacker too, Wilson reminds me of Jerome Baker. That's a fun one too,
Okay.
actually. It makes a lot of sense. And just in terms of like their strengths and weaknesses, because that was Baker's problem, was more of the run game stuff, not so much the coverage. So that makes sense.
Yeah. I can see the Jerome Baker comparison in the way that they play. However, I remember watching Jerome Baker. You go back and watch his college tape.
Yeah.
He's so much more boring than Payton Wilson.
He is.
He kind of stands there and waits for the play to develop. Now he turned out to be a solid linebacker. So I can see that happening as well.
Just really good athlete.
And then you talk about like it's so hard to find like the well-rounded guys that can do it all anymore. Like typically today's NFL, you're getting one or the other. Like you're getting the JOK type, the guy that can blitz and cover, or you're getting the downhill stuffer like the Landon Roberts or the Vince Williams type who can defend the run. It's hard to find the total package at linebacker because, and I don't know if part of it, Shayne, is these guys who fit that profile are going to play other positions because they know longevity in the NFL, where the money is. I don't know. It is interesting though that it's suddenly kind of a weak era for linebackers in today's NFL. Sure. All right, we are going to go move on to our next discussion topic. But if you are a fan of the Pittsburgh Steelers and you would like to support the Steel Curtain podcast, please consider subscribing to the Steel Curtain podcast on YouTube. We appreciate all of your support. Tell your friends and fellow Steeler fans about it if you are enjoying the coverage that we are offering. All right, Shayne, let's rank the 5 biggest strengths on the Pittsburgh Steelers roster heading into 2024. This is the time we get into the offseason where we'll do some of these ranking type lists for you. And so I comprised my rankings, Shayne, and I want to see if you have a rebuttal here and what you would do. But we're going to go in reverse order here. And we're going to basically break this down by positional group according to the 5 biggest strengths currently on the Steelers roster. There was one that just missed the cut. We can talk about that afterwards, but let's start with number 5 here. And Shayne, at number 5, strongest positional group on the Steelers, biggest strength, I have the safety position. This was an incredible area of weakness last year, largely because Minkah Fitzpatrick has suffered a big hamstring injury early in the year, missed a 4-game stretch, and I think only played a couple snaps into that the game he got injured. And so it was essentially 5 games he missed. Later in the year against the Colts, I think it was week 15, suffered a knee injury, missed the rest of the regular season. And so Minkah's health, I mean, obviously this depends on Minkah's health, much like the edge defender position depends on Watt's health. And so when Minkah's not healthy, safety position is not going to play well. If Minkah's healthy, he's healthy now, and I'm assuming that he can stay healthy this year. I like the outlook here. I think that it deserves to be mentioned among the top 5 positional groups because now you have a competent player next to you in Deshaun Elliott. And in my mind, from what I've seen from Elliott, I think that you can get maybe an upgraded version of like a Terrell Edmunds type, who the Steelers previously had. Last year, obviously, they had Keanu Neal and DeMonte KZ, a combination of those two, kind of lackluster. But if you can kick KZ back to being your 3rd safety, and then you also have Trenton Thompson, if he can stick around on the roster, you got Miles Killebrew as the core special teams ace, the all-pro special teams player. I like what they have going for them, mostly because of not the depth, but because of what you have at the top end with Minkah, who obviously can play at times like the best safety in the league. I think that on a bad day, he's probably the 10th best safety in the league on any given Sunday if he's healthy. And then Deshaun Elliott, graded out, I think, as the 36th best safety in the league last year. I think he's probably a top 40 safety in the league. The collection of the two has this as the 5th best positional group in my mind for the Steelers entering 2024.
Yeah, and I think it's fair because if Deshaun Elliott plays the way he did for the Dolphins last year, this will be a top 5 safety duo in the league pretty easily to me.
Yeah.
Especially if Minkah is healthy, because what Minkah's been able to do for the Steelers, it's been so many different things that I do think people start to like forget how good he is as a true playmaking safety. And that's the issue with him, is that in the years where he has to basically be the defense in the back half, he doesn't look as good because he's not playing his true role, which is supposed to be, in an ideal situation, the roaming middle of the field free safety, which just doesn't exist a lot in the NFL. Like, you know, Bates has been really good at it too. There's other guys who have been able to do it, but there's not many true, like, you know, obviously we're not comparing him to, you know, don't try to kill me, Ravens fans, but like Ed Reed's of the world. Like, there's not many have ever done it at his level, but not many can even do it at all. And he is one of those guys that can. So trying to get him back to that, I think, is going to be key for the defense this year. It will allow stuff to just work better in coverage. And I think Elliott should be able to help with that, because that is where he can shine, is kind of closer to the line of scrimmage in the box and do some of that stuff that Edmonds did do. As much as Steelers fans didn't always love him, he did allow Minka to be Minka a lot. That was kind of his big thing. So I do hope that those two can pair together well like that.
Yeah, I can see something similar, and you nailed it. I mean, when he can see the play developing in front of him, crash down and make plays, that's when he's at his best. And so I'm hoping he can return to that this year. I know he gets a bad rap for last season. Can't really take away anything from it because he was so often injured and missed just such a large portion of the season and was being played out of position at times because of what they had going on. And so put him back in that role. I think you'll see him thrive. He's 27 and a half years old, in the prime of his career. I mean, there's no reason for him not to reemerge as one of the top safeties in the league again this year. So I think that that's the fifth best positional group on the Steelers. Number 4, Shayne, I've got the running back position. And I think that this one is fairly self-explanatory. I mean, 3 guys are all that matter here. Anything outside of that, I really don't. I mean, P. Ryan, whoever else, it doesn't matter, because you're probably looking at one of those guys in the practice squad, and that's about it. Steelers keep 3 running backs. I like the 3 running backs: Najee Harris, Jalen Warren, Cordarrelle Patterson. You get a little bit of everything there. You get the explosiveness and the receiving ability out of Jalen Warren. You get the hard-nosed, tough running out of Najee Harris. You're getting the core special teams player out of Cordarrelle Patterson, who's obviously going to be a future Hall of Fame kick returner in the latter stages of his career. He's 33 years old. I don't think he's going to do a lot from the backfield, but whatever he does from the backfield, Shayne, will be more than what the Steelers' third running back did last year, because they did not have a third running back that touched the ball from the backfield last year. So I like this core collectively. I think that it's just a solid group all around. I think solid to good is a good way to describe this. I think it could be one of the better running back rooms in the league. And again, I hate to always bring this up, but a lot of our running back success and efficiency is predicated on the offensive scheme and the offensive line. We can expect that would only get better in this year. Yes, there's some moving parts and some guys that have to mesh, some young guys, Zach Frazier and Troy Fautanu, Broderick Jones, if he moves back over to the other side. But once they get that down, I don't think there's any reason this running back room can't be better and more efficient than they were last year.
Yeah, and actually, I will say, just as a spoiler for you, because you asked about if I had any rebuttals, I would flip this with the next one we'll talk about. I think that I would have running back at 3, mostly because I'm less concerned about the potential of the group. I think we kind of know exactly what we're getting from the running back group compared to our next one that we'll talk about. But in general, this is going to be the lifeblood of the offense. Like, what they have to be one of the 5 best position groups in the team, because if they aren't, they're not going to go on offense. Probably just isn't going to happen. So, but I think they have the talent to do it. Obviously, we know what Najee is capable of. 3,000-yard seasons, dealt with a lot of just being banged up without missing time, though. Just very consistent, even if not explosive at times. And then Jalen Warren is a firecracker, like he is. It's just, he's great, change the pace back. Really more of a true guy that could be a full-time starter, and probably will get closer to that level of production this year with the amount of times I expect us to run. And then you just throw Patterson in there. It's kind of like, we'll throw him in there sometimes, probably, right? He's a guy that even at his age, he can run. He can still go. He's a guy that could take you 50 yards if you're not careful. So, and I think that group should be the most effective running back group we've had in quite some time.
Yeah, and if you're going to have an elite running game and you don't have a Christian McCaffrey or a Nick Chubb, whatever, you need this type of approach, I think. One that's almost a 50-50 split with 2 very quality running backs who can do a lot of different things for you. Yeah. And so I fully expect the running game to be both good, efficient, and productive. I guess that's 3 things, so not both. But all 3 of those things, this year. Moving on to the next one, Shayne, the one that you would have switched. I have linebacker, off-ball linebacker, as the 3rd best positional group, and I'll give you my reasoning. I think, and we talked about these guys a little bit already, when you look around the league, you look at 31 other teams, there's a lot of these teams you could hardly name the linebackers that they have out there. We talked about what a bad era it is for linebacker play in general right now. Well, we just took whether you agree with it or not, a Pro Bowl linebacker from the Ravens, took one of the guys away. Roquan's still the better of the 2, by the way, but we got Patrick Queen. So Patrick Queen is 24 years old, by the way. We have Patrick Queen, Payton Wilson is also surprisingly 24 years old. I don't know how that works. Patrick Wilson's entering year 5, but Payton Wilson's also 24 years old. Side note, Patrick Queen, Payton Wilson, Landon Roberts, and if Cole Holcomb can come back healthy, I don't know if there are. Is there another team out there, Shayne, that is 4 deep at the position the way the Steelers are, where you're looking at it, and in my opinion, I think Landon Roberts is the worst of the 4, assuming that all 4 guys are healthy. That's a really good linebacker 4. And so I did it primarily because of the depth at the position. But then you also have at the top, you've got a really productive guy who's coming off of his best season as well.
Yeah, and I think it's 2 reasons why I think I would have them 4 and not 3. And it's mostly, one, I don't feel confident that Holcomb's going to make an impact this year until I see him actually be healthy. I'm still worried about his long-term viability as a linebacker. And then obviously Wilson's injury history / just being a rookie. And I'm a little lower on Queen than I think consensus. So like, I think you factor all those things together, I still think it's a strength of the team. I would have it just behind running back instead of running back behind it. But I think there's a few too many questions I have about the group if everything doesn't work out, where I'm not really questioning the running back group based on what I've seen from them. So.
Yeah, I get that. The running back room is more proven right now. They're already coming off a good year, and so that definitely makes sense. Projecting forward, there's again more moving parts at the linebacker position, more uncertainty there. I think that if Cole Holcomb comes back healthy, and obviously if Payton Wilson can stay on the field, I think the potential here is even greater than the running back position, because when you compare it across the league, there's a lot of teams that have successful run games. There's not a lot of teams that have a 4 deep off-ball linebacking core. So I guess it's all up to interpretation.
Yeah, that is
in the same tier.
Potential-wise,
I agree. Definitely in the same tier, and those could have gone either way. Number 2 for the Pittsburgh Steelers, their second biggest strength on the team. Very unproven here, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts. But I have the offensive line, and there are several reasons why. You spent back-to-back first-round picks on the offensive line, on offensive tackle. You haven't spent a first-round pick at all on offensive tackle in 26 years. Prior to that, and so back-to-back picks at offensive tackle, first-round picks on offensive tackle. You already had a quality pair of guards in Isaac Seumalo and James Daniels. You added to that by getting Mason McCormick. And so now you have him as a backup with Nate Herbig as a backup who can back up guard, back up center, and you added Zach Frazier. Like, to me, yes, there's a lot of uncertainty here, but the collection of the youth, the talent and upside, and the depth at the position. I mean, you might have good offensive linemen who don't make the roster this year. Spencer Anderson might not make the roster, and he might have been a serviceable backup otherwise. It's strong now. And now when you look at Dan Moore as a backup tackle instead of a starter, like that's good. I mean, for a backup tackle, you can do a lot worse than Dan Moore. That's a guy with years of starting experience under his belt, obviously assuming that he's going to be kicked to the bench. And I certainly hope that's the case. But we've seen the Steelers do crazier things. We saw who the starting tackles were last year. That's besides the point. I think the depth, the youth, and the upside has me slotting the offensive line at number 2, Shayne. Do you disagree with that?
I don't disagree. I just think it is funny how unproven a group is and still be the second biggest strength. But I think it's fair, because if you're just looking at it from a talent perspective, you have 2 first-round pick tackles, like justifiably high first-round pick tackles. In my opinion, you could have taken them higher than they did. You have 2 guards who already have proven a lot in the NFL and were really good last year. And you have a center who maybe isn't super high potential, but I'm pretty confident is going to be pretty good right now and for like 8 years, right? Like, that's what it comes down to. And then, hey, if one of those guys for some reasons isn't good, like in the interior, I think Mason McCormick's really good. He's already kind of an older player. He's pretty well developed, in my opinion. I think he could play if he had to. Like, there's so much potential with this group. Now, if all of the rookies struggle all at the same time, we might be in for a bit of a rough year. But I just don't think they will. Like, I just really trust the players that they took. I think they took players who can play right now and also have some amount of potential, especially Fatanu. But I don't see them being nearly as bad as we've seen the Lions be in the past few years. And I think it is going to be a big strength of the team, even if maybe they don't immediately show all their potential, because obviously it's hard to do that for the rookies. I think it's still going to be a strength of the team, like you said.
Yeah, and there's certainly going to be some growing pains. There's no question about that. But when you look at this offensive line, I think that there's a scenario, there's a possible outcome we're at the end of the season, we're looking at maybe James Daniels is the worst starter on your team.
Could be
That's not bad. Like
if
if that ends up being the case, I mean, 2 years ago in 2022, James Daniels was your runaway best offensive lineman on the team. After signing him, it wasn't even that close. It was a horrible offensive line. And so the bar was so low back then. Suddenly all these guys are leveling out, and you don't really have, at this point, I don't know what the weakness is going to be. It's probably going to emerge somewhere, and we're going to say, all right, this guy's got to work on something, whether that's Zach Frazier or Fautanu. But I could see a scenario where all 5 guys are good, and you're just saying, all right, it's just pick your poison here. Who do you think is the worst one? Because they're all solid football players.
Yeah.
So that is why I have the offensive line. I think more so towards the second half of the season than early on. Early on, we could see some of those growing pains. Number 1, Shayne, this should not come as a surprise to anybody, but it is the edge defender position. Impossible not to put it number 1. And this is the one position I would argue with somebody, because TJ Watt is one of the best players in the league at his position. Alex Highsmith is a top 10 or 12, maybe top 15 edge rusher in the NFL. The collection of the two make for one of the best pass rush tandems in the league. You've got Nick Herbig, who already started proving himself as a rookie, very splashy player in the limited action he saw on the field last year. The biggest downfall to this position, Shayne, is they legitimately are only 3 deep.
Yes.
They do not have a fourth.
The depth is
I couldn't even tell you who that 4th guy is going to be right now. I think your guess would be as good as mine, and anybody listening, their guess would be as good as ours. And so they don't have a 4th, and that is concerning to me, because if TJ Watt gets injured, we've seen how bad this defense can look. Everything hinges on him. But the top 3 is so solid because you have a defensive player of the year winner, a twice runner up, a 4-time first team All-Pro, and you have a terrific counterpart to go with him, that I can't put this anywhere but number 1 for the Steelers.
Yeah, I think, to put it pretty simply, and this is just to make sure everybody understands it, like if you have one guy at the top and whatever, I don't care. If you have one of the 5 best number 1s at a position on your team and one of the 5 best number 2s at that position on your team, it's gonna be your strength of your team, right? If you have a TJ Watt and you have an Alex Highsmith, that's gonna be the strength of the team. Like, that's just what it is. If it's not the strength of your team, enjoy the Super Bowl victory. Like, I don't know what to otherwise I don't know what to tell you, right? Like, that's just kind of what it comes down to. However, the depth is what scares me, right? And I know, you know how much I love Nick Herbig. I think he's great. I just need someone else to be on the team, like, soon, please, that I think could play if they had to. Because, yes, do I think Herbig could come in and play starter snaps and look very good and be able to help Highsmith or Watt if Highsmith's good, whatever, right? Yes. Who's going to spell those two then? Like, not that the Steelers care half the time who spells anybody, but I'd still like to have an option. Like, that's my biggest thing, is like, okay, even if the guy doesn't play, have him on the team so you could put someone out there if you have to. Like, that's the thing I struggle with this team so much with roster building, is like, okay, fine, I get it. You want to play your edge rushers 90% of the time. I don't agree with that, but like, whatever. Okay. Have a plan if that doesn't work, because it doesn't work all the time. So just they have evidence it doesn't always work. Like, that's the thing that gets me too. I don't know. But other than that, it's clearly the top position on the team. I cannot really say otherwise. So.
Yeah, and Shayne, I do find it kind of comical that your entire game plan is predicated around TJ Watt's health, essentially.
Pretty much.
That we want to be a good defense. We want to keep other teams from scoring, but we're not going to have an insurance policy for our by far the best player on our roster. And so I feel like that is kind of malpractice in that regard. You need to have at least 4.
I always say at least 4, preferably 6, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, other teams, they have a much heavier rotation.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, Watt and Highsmith, they're fine not coming off the field. They like being out there.
They do.
But injuries happen. We've seen it happen before. We've seen it derail this team before. Having said that, I still just can't put this positional group anywhere but number 1 as the biggest strength on the Steelers roster, because of the reasons that we mentioned. You've got a top 5 number 1. You've got a top 5-ish number 2. Nick Herbig shows some promise as a number 3, and that's good enough for me. It takes the cake as my top positional group. If you guys have a different opinion about that, if you want to drop your list to us here in the YouTube channel, please do that. We'd love to hear what your thoughts are on Pittsburgh's 5 best positional groups as we enter the summer of 2024. All right, we go live on this show every Wednesday at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time. Thank you for following us on the show today. You can follow Shayne on Twitter at Shayne Kubas. You can follow me on Twitter at Tommy Jaggi. You can download the Steel Curtain podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Also check us out on YouTube or ask Alexa to play the Steel Curtain podcast. And thanks again for listening to the Steel Curtain podcast.